You're listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mattison, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everyone. This is Ashton Kirsch. Welcome to another exciting episode of your favorite podcast, the Subrogation Support Network podcast, with your host, Ashton Kirsch, and our wonderful guest today, Brian Spitalski. Sorry about
Close
that.
enough.
Hey, I try, Brian. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. A pleasure to be here.
Well, Brian, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do over with Invista?
Okay. I am a senior consultant, which is a big word for a fire investigator with Invista Forensics. We are a rather large forensic company, international. I work the West Coast. I am a certified fire investigator with the International Association of Arson Investigators. I'm also a licensed private investigator in California, Oregon, and Washington. Currently working on my PI in Montana. That just gives them more places to send me, so I'm kind of taking my time with it.
What's your favorite place to travel then? If they could send you anywhere, where would you go?
Well, I would have said Hawaii until just earlier this year when Maui unfortunately had its incident. I find every place that I go to, as far as the fire goes, very exciting. You usually don't have a lot of time to go around and sightsee and stuff. So I would say Washington is the best, only because it's overcast up there. You're not baking out in the sun, and it's usually damp, which keeps the ash down in the fire scene.
Beautiful. And now, Brian, obviously we spoke before and I asked you, hey, what kind of work you primarily do? And you said, if it burns, I'm probably handling it. So you're dealing with all areas of fire claims, right?
That's correct. I do defense work. I do subrogation work. I do research. There's been a lot of fires where there hasn't really been a party involved other than they want to understand what happened. And there's a lot of different motivations for that.
And you're dealing with the ONC, origin and cause, trying to figure out how this fire started. Is that right?
That's correct. And when I get to a point, if there is a need for another expert, some of the work goes outside of my scope. I quickly bring in a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, whatever that expert is. We typically have them, or at least know where we can find them.
So in this podcast, one thing that I've really been stressing and trying to do more of is bring on folks like yourself, experts, so that we can get the audience really, the way I always say it is that retaining experts is both an art and a science. I mean, it takes a lot of skills for an adjuster and attorney to be able to find the right person for the right job. Example being, I have a few engineers that I'll use. I don't care where where the loss is. I'm going to fly them in because I got a guy who's the world-renowned expert in reefer unit fires, right? That's the refrigeration units on a trailer. And I've got different folks for different jobs. And it's so important that those in the audience, meet these folks, right? Talk to people like Brian at conferences, call them up, have these conversations. And that's where I was hoping, I've always enjoyed working with Brian. And I think these are good opportunities for us to make an introduction to you and also give us the chance to kind of talk about claims and discuss, your insights. You see a ton of different stuff with all the different kinds of fires. You're handling everything from a wildfire to a, dishwasher fire, right? And everything in between, just negligent discarding of smoking material or whatever it could be. I mean, you're seeing a lot of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Everything. You name it. You just went through a very large amount of them, but yeah, we go through a lot of different causes.
What's your favorite type of claim to investigate?
A larger claim. The single room, those can be interesting. You got the apartment or the house and you got the bed burning and stuff like that. Those are okay, but I like the ones that are more detailed, the more experts you have out there where you're having to work together. I really enjoy working with other experts, and not just fire guys, but engineers, because I'm always learning, especially from those engineers. And I'm hopefully none of them are listening now because they're geeks, but I love listening to them and the way that they talk. So you're always learning. And if you bump into a fire investigator that says, he's got it down or he knows it all, I would say walk away from that expert pretty quick, because I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm just starting to touch the tip of the iceberg. I love the work just because it's always educational, and you're getting to work with other people most of the time.
I mean, these engineers, maybe they're geeks, right? We all may be, right? I'm a subrogation attorney, Brian. But when it comes down to it, there's nothing better than going to lunch with your experts to have these fascinating conversations after a fire and fire inspection, and just having everybody in the place look towards you, just furious that you'd have the audacity to come in smelling like a campfire. I mean,
right.
We've all done that once or twice.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you hit on a great point there. To know your expert, a lot of insurance adjusters don't know their experts at the very get-go. A lot of them are just checking the box, and they'll call who's ever closest, or somebody that they've been working with for a while, but they don't understand the true qualifications. I think that is one of the most important things at the start of the file, is know the experts that you're going to need and know what their qualifications are. Are they a certified fire investigator? Are they an expert witness? Have they ever been deposed? I mean, all of that stuff you should know beforehand. And you being a subro guy, you know that stuff. You don't want to get on the stand and have somebody rip you apart in a challenge, have your expert look ridiculous. And that happens with some of these guys who do cheap jobs, but, don't get on the stand a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell my clients, you can't just rely on the CV. You have to pick up the phone. You have to have these conversations, and every case is going to be different, right? I might pick a different expert on a case where I know it's going to have to be litigated, right? There's certain experts that I know are going to perform well, be it ONCs like yourself or a mechanical engineer. And I know, you know what? They're 90% on the issues and their knowledge, but they're 100% on presenting it, right? So it's about being strategic and finding the right person for the right role. I think that's huge. So yeah, pick up the phone. Rule one for the listeners in the audience, pick up the phone, actually talk to your experts. Frankly, the amount of stuff we can learn as well. I mean, who would have thought that I would be fearful and living in constant fear of my toilet water supply line, or the fires that could be caused by, by my radiator, whatever it could be. There's a lot of things we can learn too that, isn't necessarily related to directly each claim, but, pick up the phone. I know that most experts, they're not going to be charging me for initial consultations anyway. So I'm calling up and asking several people about their thoughts, their experience, and so forth to find the right person for the job. And Brian, you're one of those right people. And I know that you and I have discussed a lot on a very hot topic. That being actually two of the last 5 recordings we've done have been on wildfire claims. We discussed the Maui claims. We discussed the California claims. It's my understanding you also handle a large quantity of wildfire claims. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've touched almost every major wildfire since 17, one way or another.
As in you're going out to the scene and you're retained as an expert to investigate and give an opinion on origin?
Or research on it, understanding the other investigators' conclusions and analyzing those conclusions. Are they based on facts? Are they just saying things and not supporting it? Risk assessments of utility companies based on wildfire threats and exposure, liability issues, things like that. So part of what I do is not just ONC stuff. It is risk assessment, analysis, and understanding and being able to communicate with an attorney. I've got a few attorneys that just call me to say, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me a little bit differently than what the fire department report is or what an engineer is saying? So a lot of that ties into the wildfire aspect of it. Is you've got clients who want to understand different points, and being able to explain that to them, and doing the research on the wildfire and understanding how that fire happened and how it progressed and why it did what it did, and then explaining it to the attorney or the client is very, very interesting.
Yeah, and we've really, we've been going hot and heavy into the wildfire arena recently. So let's get that out of the way and kind of briefly touch on a few more topics related to that. Then I want to go into some of the more meat and potatoes of fire origin analysis.
Okay.
The next thing is, I mean, as an expert, what are you really looking for when you're going out there and you're retained to give an opinion on origin for a wildfire? And maybe if you have an example you can go into, go for it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I'm going out there as a fire investigator. I am trying to understand how this fire started and how it spread and how it did what it did. I don't care who my client is. That makes a difference down the road, but not as I'm trying to understand the fire. I don't pick a team when I'm understanding the fire. Now, as I understand it, what I will say out loud or what I will describe to my client is a different story. But initially, I am the fire investigator. I try not to get anybody else's opinion before I get there. I don't request a fire department report until I'm done. I'd prefer even not to talk to the fire guys until after I've done my initial scene assessment. So once you get an understanding of the fire in a neutral way, then you can figure out and explain to my client, be it a subrogation attorney or a defense counsel, is here's what it is. This is what it is. It's the facts. I'm not going to try to swing it for my client.
That's kind of fascinating to hear. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that. Would be that, for you, it's best to just go out there and take a look before you even look at any of the fire department reports. I can say that whenever I notice up inspections or anything there, the first thing all the parties are asking for is that FD report. In your opinion, it sounds like you're saying, no, you want to go out there with a totally unbiased perspective, come to terms with what you see rather than necessarily relying on someone else's work. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I can tell you that my opinion, usually at least better than half, differs from the fire department. That's just a level of training, experience, not to beat down or talk down the fire department, fire investigators. I come from a municipality. So, but I also know how much more training I've gotten than what a typical line guy has at a fire department.
Well, I think that's important to note for anybody listening, right? Big word of wisdom for your practice is that, the fire departments, I mean, frankly, they're looking for different things. A lot of times their focus is arson. Their focus is on, not necessarily the exact cause to what has occurred. I can't tell you how many cases I've had where the initial fire report says undetermined, right? Undetermined.
Right.
What does that mean? Well, the fact is that means that you push the fire department. We've had depositions on this. Well, then we pushed whomever wrote that report for the FD on, and they said, well, we were unable to determine, who caused this. We didn't see any arson or whatever it could be. And just kind of their definition of undetermined is based on, a different standard than maybe what yours would be, right? Their review is based on a different standard. They don't necessarily care about determining exactly how this occurred in all situations. They have other goals, other motivations. They're trying just to make the scene safe and put this fire out. I mean, would you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, the fire department's sole purpose is, or at least the fire department's fire investigator, is to determine if it's arson, because that's where they have the authority to pursue. If it's not arson, we were always told to stop. If you can say that it's not an arson fire, that it's coming from an area and you can explain away everything else, but you've said it's not arson, then you stop what you're doing. You leave it for the privates to come out there and you leave it as an undetermined fire if you don't know for sure. And that's where you probably run into a lot of fire departments. The fire investigator wants to throw some sort of a conclusion on it, and he gets himself in trouble because he's not an electrical engineer and he hasn't a full understanding of the situation or the scenario that's in play.
Agreed. The fire reports, it can be really important, especially when we're looking for a timeline, right? There's oftentimes a really nice timeline included on, sometimes even minute by minute of the recording as to what actually occurred. But when it comes to their final conclusions, I just encourage everyone, read the reports, obtain them. They're absolutely necessary and they assist with our review. But you still need to get your own origin expert out there to take a look and give you that opinion.
Absolutely agree with that 100%.
So speaking of that scene, right? what advice do you have for adjusters or attorneys on the appropriate steps in preserving a fire scene so you can get out there and give an initial opinion?
Slow down. I think that would be the biggest thing is slow down. Let us get there and understand it. So many times we get the phone call saying, hey, have you gotten out there? I need to release the scene. The client or the insured is wanting to get in there. If we're not able to do a thorough investigation or we are rushed, and a lot of guys will just say, yeah, you know what, I don't know what it is, just to be able to close out the file. When you're losing great opportunity for subrogation, I mean, you have to be creative and understand everything that's at play when you're talking about subrogation. There are a lot of times when fire sprinklers are absolutely missed, or smoke alarms are missed, or monitor detection is missed as a subrogation potential. So there's a necessity to get the file looked at. I understand that, but give it a little bit of a time for us to give you a good product.
Absolutely. And I can tell you that, the role of a subrogation adjuster or subrogation attorney, I mean, it's really multifaceted. There's so many different elements to it. And one of the really important elements is just being a communicator. Same with you. I mean, we have to reach out to these insureds. And frankly, many of the insureds that just suffered an extremely catastrophic event in their life, right? Their house burnt down or their car started on fire, whatever it could be. And now you're coming to them and saying, hey, Joe, I know that you're living in maybe a crummy hotel right now, and you don't have any of your clothes and you have nothing, but we need you to hold off for 60 days while we notice up and do the appropriate subrogation investigation. Or we go forward. But it's really it's so essential though. And I can't tell you how many clients reach out to me saying, hey, we got to rush this. We have to rush the scene inspection because the insured's really getting antsy. And the perspective is, well, then you're probably just going to be negating subrogation potential. There's really no cutting corners. I mean,
Right.
we can expedite things, right? Your attorney shouldn't be waiting 3 weeks to notice up the inspection, right? Your attorney should be doing that right away, or you should be doing that right away. But we also need to inform the insureds on our end that, here's the importance of this. Here's the impact. Your policy probably has a duty to cooperate in the subrogation inspection and investigation and so forth. All the time. And there's an approach to this, right? I mean, there's procedure based. It's step by step by step. Send out those notice letters, identify the parties, find an agreeable date. I guess my practice is always, and everyone's different, is I always immediately, once I get that file, I notice up the potential scene inspection. Within a week, I say, reach out to me. We're going to find agreeable dates. Here's what works for my team. Okay. Either they get back to me, we take them into their perspective into consideration, we jointly schedule, or two, oftentimes we hear nothing back. So we just select a date. Frankly, but that's where we can be tougher, right? I have a case right now. Manufacturer doesn't get back to me. We notice it up 45 days out. We give plenty of time, frankly, because my expert wasn't available until 45 days out. So we got it scheduled. We're good to go. 15 days before, the opposing counsel reached out and said, hey, I need this exact expert to be there. And they have 3 dates in December. Well, the inspection is coordinated for first week in November. Well, that doesn't work, right? You could have reached out immediately, but ultimately, my response was, well, I can provide you with about 24 very capable engineers who can join you during that scene inspection. And it's just a reasonableness standard. But ultimately, that's just me droning on and on about this. But the biggest thing, as you noted, Brian, that I always like to mention is we can't take shortcuts here. We need to make sure we give you the time as the origin and cause expert to go out there, take a look, to notice up a joint scene inspection with the cause experts, with maybe the engineers or whomever else we need, and to make sure that, we do this by the book to avoid spoliation, right? To also get to the bottom of it, right? If you get out there, you never know when you get to the scene. Maybe we all thought it was the dishwasher, but guess what? We get there and we find out, well, it was actually the toaster oven or whatever it could be, right? Notice up all parties, even tangentially related parties, so that you don't have to stop moving and cancel. I mean, how often do you see it pretty often where you get out there like, hold up, we're actually going to need to stop. There's another party in play.
Just had it happen just last week. Monday, up in a town way up northeast in California, had a room where there was a thought. It was one item. Burn patterns didn't support that thought. As we processed the room, we found another item that was in the area, so we had to stop what we were doing and allow the attorney for the other side, or the homeowner, to put the manufacturer of that item on notice. So yeah, that does happen, unfortunately. One of the things I can stress is, you hit on it earlier, know your expert, because the way your expert communicates with you from a fire scene before he leaves should answer almost all of your questions. It should provide you with, if not photos before he leaves the scene, but all available technology. We provide drone shots. We provide Matterport 3D viewing. We're working on some other great pieces of technology that before we leave the scene, our clients have that information. They're able to look at everything while I'm still there, and we can talk about it. And so the attorney, the insurance adjuster, or sub-road claims handler all know what's going on typically before I leave the scene. Now, it doesn't happen every single time, but I would say better than 80% of the time, that's how it works.
Well, you mentioned technology. Let's go into some of that, because at least in my practice, I've noticed over the last, 8 years, just some huge, advances in technology, especially when it comes to fire investigation. For everything from, LiDAR technology, Matterport, just drones, all the above. Touch on a few things that you've been using recently, and, what's changed over the last few years.
One of the greatest things for me at a fire scene is the Matterport LiDAR, the Pro 3. I think it's which camera it is. But the first thing I do when I get to a fire scene is I LiDAR, I scan it, I Matterport it inside out. I upload it, and then I start my scene processing. I usually will fly a drone overhead depending on where I'm at, because being licensed, an FAA license, you can't fly near airports, or if you're in a restricted area, you're not allowed to fly. So depending on where my area is, I usually fly the drone overhead to get the roof shots. If I'm working a wildfire, I'll do 3D mapping. And then I'll process the scene. And one of the cool things that you can do with the Matterport is it gives you a diagram when you're all done with it. So I can shoot the link over to my client, and I don't know if everybody listening is familiar with Matterport, but it gets processed, and then you get a link which allows other people to view what you did. Matterport is like a virtual walkthrough for real estate, only it's more accurate. So we're able to shoot that over, and an attorney in Arizona or Indiana or Europe somewhere can click on that link, and we can talk on the phone and walk through a fire scene. They can understand the burn patterns, and it's not just a sheet of 2 photos per page and you're trying to understand where you're standing in the room. This gives you a 3D view of the structure of whatever it is that you scanned, and then it'll kick out a accurate diagram, and you can plot on your diagram all the important things, where you've taken samples, where your area of origin is, where people were standing at the time when they saw the fire. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's just happening with the Matterport. But the technology side isn't just on your structure fires, it's on your wildland stuff. I can't tell you how much information is available if you know where to look for it. When you're talking about wildfires, you can understand power poles, what their numbers are, where they're being powered from, the voltage on them, who supports it, what the utility company it is, wind direction, smoke mapping, topography, vegetation, moisture content. It's just unreal how much stuff you can grab off the internet. Out here on the West Coast, we have cameras, thousands of cameras that are available for viewing, and they archive a lot of that recording. If you know how to get it, a lot of times you can catch a startup of a fire if the camera's pointing in the right direction. And typically once the fire starts and it's understood that there's a fire there, they'll direct the camera to it, and they'll sit there and watch it. So there's tons of technology out there. I don't think we have enough time to talk about all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I can say this. You speak of cameras, right? I've been doing that almost on every case that I have, from an auto collision to a fire claim,
Yep.
to a slip and fall, whatever it is. One of the first things I've been doing is just starting with a Google Maps view and then actually sending somebody to the scene if the file justifies it, to just look around and see if anyone has a Ring camera or there's
Yep.
cameras anywhere. I can tell you that, I have, Amazon Blink cameras all around my house, right? Which costs me, I think they're $40 a piece, and it stays active for 2 years and it records everything. I mean, and it just, you screw it up there, right? The technology is so accessible that there frankly are now just videos of almost everything. So always just think outside of the box there. I encourage on everything from auto claims to fire claims. Further, I mean, when it comes to these fires, also the amount of technology that comes that's actually included in vehicles and heavy equipment.
Yep.
Most farm implements now, they have some of the most intense GPS data recordings. Obviously, when it comes to a lot of the Teslas of the world and the really advanced vehicles, they have all kinds of data that's accessible. Even kind of the quote unquote dumb vehicles. Now they have black box technology where you can get quite a bit of data. So if you know where to look and get the right experts, there's just a lot of things that you can creatively find.
Absolutely. I do a lot of work for manufacturers of RVs, and a lot of these RVs now upload to a cloud, even when they're not in full operation. So you're able to collect data from their motherboard, the computer center, and it talks about all the appliances that are in operation and where there's trouble issues or breaker stripping or fuses popping. So yeah, you just got to understand it and know where to go.
So it's important as an expert, especially with what you do, then to stay up to date with this technology. And you can't be left behind. I mean, it used to be maybe, you had your experience from the fire department, you read the books, took the courses, and then you just do the same thing for years and years. I feel like that's not the case anymore. You actually need to regularly, every year, every day, stay up to speed on what the new technologies are so that you can be as effective as possible for your clients.
Yeah, and you got to use your imagination, because there is a lot of technology that is available out there that typically isn't posted in some sort of a bulletin manual or something that all fire investigators read to say, hey, here's new technology. You've got to kind of understand the way things are and use your imagination and try to understand, or at least get outside of that box and figure out what you can use.
Yeah, I try to convince as many clients as possible on decent sized losses to utilize Matterport technology recently. I mean, the costs have been just sinking recently, where now it's more feasible. It used to be that Matterport could be used on major cat losses, right? Now it's to the point where mid-sized losses, it can be justified. And I think it's really underutilized. Do you have a ballpark? What does it typically cost to, rig up a Matterport system and actually get the, utilize Matterport in let's say a standard, 2,000 square foot house?
I use it on every residential fire I go to. The client doesn't get billed for it except for a time of me doing it. So there isn't an additional charge for it. It's just I'm taking 35 minutes to shoot 50 shots of the Matterport, and then I'm starting my fire scene processing. And that actually makes up in what time it would spend for me to do a diagram, because it's a more accurate diagram. I'm not sitting there with a laser or a tape measure. It does it all for me off of the LiDAR. So it's actually saving money if you're using it the right way and you got the right expert.
That's excellent. I mean, and it's a way to also avoid spoliation, avoid everything else. You preserve that scene in pretty much its original virtual condition in a way. I mean, I've had a lot of, I had a case recently where we were almost certain, right? Client sent it over, the most obvious in their opinion. It was a fire in a refrigeration unit, right? Big industrial refrigeration unit. They were 99% certain when they sent this to me. Great case. Next thing you know, everyone goes out there and the insured and initial inspection, they find out, oh, wait, hold up. It was actually the configuration of the equipment, and there wasn't enough gap between the devices, between the equipment. Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, guess what? In the meantime, after that first inspection, despite the insured being told not to do anything, they had just removed everything and, totally deteriorated the scene. So
Yeah.
all that mattered there was the clearance, right? Thank goodness Matterport was used, the recordings were done. So, while there could be a allegation of spoliation, it really wouldn't go anywhere because the only thing at issue was that clearance. And that was fully recorded through obviously true recordings and laser recordings, but also with the Matterport technology. So, I mean, yeah, that's huge.
Yep. It does make a difference, and it is a time saver in the long run.
Now, you also mentioned 3D mapping. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you meant by that?
That's huge when it's coming to wildfires. And, some of your larger structures, it's a big deal. It paints a great picture um, to the client. And what I want to be able to do is paint my picture to a jury. I always look at a fire scene as to what my end I want it to be. If I'm going to take a file from beginning to the end, which in my opinion would be in front of a jury, and I'm presenting it, I want a jurist to understand exactly what I'm talking about. And the way you do that is with technology. Everybody in the world just thinks that it's Hollywood. You go out and the lab tech is out there on the fire scene, and he's also, doing all the evidence collection, and you can figure this out in an hour. And you and I both know, and everybody probably listening knows that we're not Hollywood. It takes a little bit of time, and if you've got all of the information with some cool technology, it makes the jurist understand better. They can relate to it because you've got this stuff in front of them that they can almost feel, and that's your sell. You can have the best expert if he can't communicate a fire scene to a layman, then what good are you if you can't explain it? So there's a lot of different things to look at, but the 3D mapping is great for wildfires because it gives us elevation differences. It gives us height on poles, wire distances, dimensions of wires. All of that stuff is put into a giant 3D map, and we can go back and look at it later on and get a full picture of what's the space between the tree and the line, and how far is the droop or the sag in the line to the communication line that's underneath it. You're looking at all of that stuff to paint your picture.
And how does this 3D mapping work then? I mean, is this using drone technology? Or are you using cameras that are placed around the actual, as we relate to a fire scene for a wildfire, how does that actually work in recording and obtaining this data?
It depends on what you're shooting. So Matterport is a form of 3D mapping.
Right.
It takes thousands of photos, stitches them together, and gives you that rendering based on where the walls, windows, everything that's measurable. And it just puts it in different points. So when I do a house and I'm shooting, let's say 30 different points of my camera, the camera takes thousands of photos and stitches it all together. And then you can go to each one of those spots where I placed my camera and do a 360 view from there. So it's kind of, sorry about that. We might have to edit that out. That's that phone call I was telling you about. Sorry.
You're good.
Do you want me to just?
Yeah, just start over and then Emma will cut that part out. I'll ask you, well, yeah, just keep talking and we'll splice it in.
Okay. So the 3D stitching of all of the photos together on a fire scene, and I think that's where we were with this, is it's just a huge puzzle. You just put this puzzle together, and it's all done by the people doing the 3D rendering, depending on what you're using. If you're using a drone, you upload all the photos, they process it, and then they give you back the finished product. And it's just thousands of photos that are stitched together.
Excellent. Now, another question that I was hoping to get into with you is the idea of, advice for adjusters and attorneys on expert retention. As I mentioned before, it's both an art and a science. It takes a skill set. It takes making phone calls, asking the right questions, interviewing the experts. What tips do you have for adjusters and attorneys when they are moving forward with hiring a new expert for a specific exam?
Again, comes back to know your expert. Know what the qualifications are. Understand where they stand in that field of expertise. Are they brand new at the beginning of it? Have they been doing it for 20 years? Did they just come over from driving a bus and now they've got a certification through one of these places that you can go to and spend a week at a class, and now all of a sudden you're certified?
Right.
Understand what that expert is, and get a relationship with your expert. There are so many times, as I said earlier, that I get a call from my attorneys that just want to understand something that I'm not even involved in. And I don't charge them for that stuff. That's part of being the expert. So know your expert, know his qualifications, know how he communicates. Does he talk over the top with big words and lots of initials after his name, or does he just explain it in simple terms so that you can understand it, but yet has the training and experience to get up on the stand and know what he's talking about?
I prefer the simple terms, and I appreciate that.
So
my favorite thing to get into as we kind of wrap this one up is I always like to ask, any good stories of fires you've investigated or claims that you've looked into that you want to mention to the audience or you think we'd find interesting?
You hit me with this in the beginning of or when we were just getting warmed up for this thing. And the one I can think about is a death penalty case that is somewhat active. It's about to become very active, but it was a great example of being thorough and not skipping corners or just assuming that it's one of those typical arson fires and you're never going to figure it out. I had a van fire that was obviously an arson based on, the burn patterns, the rag hanging out of the fuel cap, the multiple areas of origin within the van. At that time, it was just another vehicle fire in an area where we always get vehicle fires. And this, obviously, I was working for a city at this time. Instead of just saying, yeah, it's another arson fire, my detective, I worked with a lot, beat me up often with the red marker on my report. So I just was always thinking in my mind, if I don't do this the right way, he's going to red mark me on everything. So I did it all the right way. And it turned out it's coming back to change a jury and their mind on how somebody was convicted, and definitely changed how the death penalty was placed on this person. Not to change the guilt in any way, but there was never an understanding. This was never brought up in court. There was no talk of it until years afterwards, and the Innocence Project got involved, the media's involved, people writing books are involved, and now the district attorney for that area is involved. And there was DNA that was collected out of this van that paints a very ugly picture outside of this person who was convicted of this homicide, a double homicide. So because it is still an active, or it is now becoming an active fire investigation, I don't want to give out a whole bunch other than to say, following the steps every single time not only will make a difference in a case, but it can make a difference in a life. It can make a difference in how we look at death penalty and how quickly it was drawn to be, yes, this person did it. Yes, they deserve the death penalty, but they didn't complete the investigation. There's a lot of loopholes that weren't followed or weren't properly looked at on outside of the fire investigation I'm talking about. So that again comes back to your expert. Know your expert. Make sure that your expert follows the steps all the time, every time, and doesn't do the shortcut. And stay tuned on this. This will start hitting out there. Somebody will recognize me talking about it.
Well, thanks, Brian. I mean, I definitely would say that you're a very interesting example. And I would say that that's a great example, as most of the other things we've talked about today, as to why the processes and procedures are so important. Yep. And that's why having a good expert in your corner is huge there, because that one, the adjuster, the attorney, they should know those processes. They should know those procedures, right? But we do rely on the expert to make sure that they're also followed. So yeah, do things by the books. Don't cut corners. Retain the right people, just like you, Brian, and ask the right questions. So no, that's awesome. I appreciate all of your insight.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to add before we wrap this thing up?
No, I've really enjoyed it. And if there's another time when you need to chat about fire, please give me a call.
Yeah. And I'd encourage anyone in the audience, if you have fire claims, reach out to Brian. He's always there. He's been a great resource for me over the years. And, he's good at what he does. So again, Brian, thank you so much. Everyone in the audience, we appreciate your listening to us today. This is Ashton Kirsch, wrapping up this episode of the Subrogation Support Network podcast. Until next time, thank you.